So, greetings, one and all. How good and how lovely it is to be together here in community, on screen, across the globe, friends and members from Dublin and these lands we call Australia, friends from the Netherlands and from Germany, from Switzerland and from Scotland and England and all parts of the world, including Turtle Island, USA, and Canada. How good it is to be together in community, and how particularly great it is to be here during Advent and with Alex Wimberly from the Corrymeela Community. I'm so delighted, Alex, to welcome you here. Thank you for joining us.
And it's
This
enjoyable.
conversation tonight is part of a wider series of conversations over the course of Advent with leaders of intentional Christian communities from around the globe to explore what it is that we as intentional Christian communities bring, particularly, if anything, during the season of Advent. If you've just joined us for this session and it piques your interest, please do sign up for the other three sessions on the next 3 Mondays during Advent. For now, however, I'm truly delighted to welcome Alex Wimberly, leader of the Corrymeela Community. Hi,
Hi, Ruth. Good to see you and good to be with folks in this way.
it's great to have you here. I always think of Corrymeela as a sister community of the Iona community. I don't know if that is, we haven't really ever completely formally agreed that's a sibling relationship, but it feels like that, Alex. It's so good to have you here. We have a long story, a long relationship between the Iona community and the Corrymeela community. But can I begin just by inviting you to introduce yourself to us all and to introduce yourself through the lens of the Corrymeela community? What's your connection with Corrymeela? What led you to become a member? What has led you to this role of leadership? And it would be great if I can just add another little question to hear a little bit about the origin story of Corrymeela, because I believe it's your 60th birthday this year.
It is.
Some words of introduction, Alex.
It's our 60th anniversary. Yes, I believe that the 90th for Iona is coming up soon. So if we're sisters, there's quite an age gap between us. I'd hate to age you and call you our mother, but we do have a familial relationship. It's
We
very
do.
close and familial in different ways. I was spending time with your brother-in-law just this weekend, so there are a lot of ties
Yeah.
between Iona and Corrymeela community. And my link to Corrymeela comes, like most people, I've kind of stumbled upon Corrymeela. I come from the States. I come from the state of Indiana, um, near Chicago. I'm a fourth generation Presbyterian minister. And part of my vocational discernment had a lot to do with Ireland. I came as a boy to Ireland because my father did a pulpit exchange in Northern Ireland. I came as a seminarian to find out whether or not I had a genuine calling to be a minister or just a psychological desire to be like dad or a lack of originality. I came back after finishing seminary in the States to be the minister of a church in Belfast with a lot of historic ties with the Corrymeela community, though had not actually ever been to the Corrymeela community or to the site on the North Coast until after about 12, 13 years ago, my family and I, we moved back to the States for all the right reasons, immediately regretted it, but had burnt all of our bridges in terms of visas. And so found ourselves longing to be back in Northern Ireland, longing to do ministry back here, but unable to do so. And I was finishing a doctoral program working on the theme of reconciliation, studying people who were very similar to the ones who started Corrymeela back in the 1960s. And my wife said, well, we could go and volunteer at Corrymeela for a year and you could finish your dissertation there, which I thought was a fairly dumb idea because it was only going to kick the can down the road as to what I was doing professionally because I couldn't stay here and get a job. And I also knew that coming back for a year would only make me want to be here more permanently and less and more homesick or, kind of sick in the sense of not feeling at home anywhere. But came kicking and screaming because my wife is always right. And it turned out she was. And I loved it as soon as I arrived, felt very much at home, felt immediately as if I belonged, which is not everybody's experience at Corrymeela, but is what we hope everyone experiences at Corrymeela, a sense of belonging and community, a sense of a new start in the midst of a very diverse collection of people. And during that year as a volunteer, people said, you should think of the staff position that's opening up at Corrymeela. And I go, oh, I'd love to do that, but I'm not eligible. And they said, well, just look again. And at that point, the UK visa laws had a strange clause that said that religious orders, because they are set apart from society due to their religious devotion, can bring into employment members of their order without having to do a fair market labor test. And if you squint hard enough, Corrymeela fits that definition. So I am technically here as a monk, which was a big surprise to the wife and kids and the Presbyterian but was able to come and started as the chaplain at Corrymeela, which I don't know if there's an equivalent. It's not quite the warden role, but certainly would be more in terms of the spiritual and lived community life of Corrymeela. And then when my predecessor, Padre Tuma, stepped away from the leadership role, I was chosen to succeed him. I think in some ways because I fit a particularly weird spot of I had been a volunteer, I was a member, I was part of the staff, I was sort of theologically minded because of my work in the church and my academic life. So they couldn't find anybody else, and I became the leader. And so I've been the leader of the Corrymeela community for 6 years now, and have therefore been able to be a part of our reflection and our strategic thinking, or reflection over the last 60 years, and our strategic thinking for the next 60 years. And of course, as you and I both know, Ruth, our leadership tenures also coincided with COVID, and ideas of how are you a diverse community? What makes a community? How are you a community in this weird sense of being in that epidemic? And my training as a historian has given me a chance to kind of look back at the history of Corrymeela and its origins and why that is still relevant for the world today. So we could talk about maybe its relevance later, but you asked about the origin story.
I guess the origin story, and I just want to clock, really interesting threads there about your sense of belonging, your sense of home, a sense of calling, almost the sense of being, a foreigner in a strange land, and where do you fit? Such universal themes, Alex, as we enter this I guess this poignant time around Advent. So thank you for sharing that. But if you can share a little bit with us about the origin story. And actually, what I also should have said was, for those who don't know me, my name is Ruth. I work for the Iona Community as the leader. And I should have said that right at the beginning. But now back to you and the origin story of Corrymeela. Be great to hear that.
More of you, less of me. That's fine, Ruth. I think we'll be much served by often, frequent interruptions. But the origin story, what we would say is that we have been on the site called Corrymeela for 60 years, but our story begins 80 years ago in the Second World War, when a man named Ray Davy, who was training for the Presbyterian ministry, went off as a non-combatant to work with the YMCA early in the war. He was captured by the Germans, could have been sent home as a non-combatant, but stayed on because he was discovering in himself and in that experience the ability to make new communities from diverse collections of people, and finding that very exciting. That there were people being thrown together from all walks of life, different classes, different countries, and a sense of being able to meet people in their difference, but to discover that we're actually not all that different from one another. And so moving from North Africa to Italy to Germany, traveling with the prisoners of war as a chaplain, he found himself outside of Dresden in February of 1945 and witnessed the destruction, the annihilation of Dresden. And the founding moment for Ray Davy in many ways was his realization that these were the supposed good guys. This was the RAF, this was the US Air Force, that in the name of destroying hatred was succumbing to hatred and the dehumanization of others. They were destroying Dresden with such a disregard of human life that he was able to see that we actually are not all that different than those we call other. All of
Mm.
us are just as likely to succumb to the madness, the disease of hatred and dehumanization when we stop seeing other people as fellow children of God. And coming back to Northern Ireland, he had that experience and he had the charisma to attract to himself a generation or two or three of young, earnest Christians who were trying to figure out how to be Christian in the mid 20th century, uh, who were very much influenced by places like Iona and people like George MacLeod, and were interested in other ecumenical communities like Taizé and the Agape community, and came to the conclusion in the early 1960s, looking around a divided Northern Ireland, hearing sermons on Sunday about peace and justice and the love of God, and then walking into a culture, a society, a supposedly Christian state where it was us versus them, the goodies, the baddies, the holies, the unholy. And they came to the conclusion that the church is dead.
Yeah.
And what is needed in its place to resurrect from its tomb is genuine Christian community.
Okay.
And so that is what inspired them to start the Corrymeela Community. And as they were figuring out how they could create a new place that belonged to everyone and no one, where there was the chance for a new start. 9 acres on the north coast of Ireland, and the most gorgeous piece of land came up for sale for
Mhm.
a very reasonable price. And they bought it not really knowing what they were going to do with it, but knowing that they could be a part of something really amazing.
What a remarkable story. And I've heard bits of that before. And I was lucky enough to meet Ray Davy years ago. But to hear it again, Alex, through the lens of, this is the first week in Advent, through the lens of what's happening in our world. The stories of the Second World War and the First World War are so resonant in terms of the rise of violence and hatred in our world, and the use of violence to quash violence, and the horrible paradox of that, and the story of Dresden still being a resonant story for so many of us across Europe and the world. And I'm conscious that on the screen are people from Germany and from other parts of the world where violence has been used to control in so many ways and to destroy. We are sister communities in the sense, maybe we're the big sister here, but we're not really. We're siblings. There's a connection because of that origin story in the inspirational poignancy of the consequence of war and violence, and the necessity in people like Ray Davy, George MacLeod, Ralph Morton for us as well, and all the founding members of our community who said that in the face of such destruction, we we applaud all attempts to build and rebuild community. And George
Mm.
MacLeod would have said, the founder of the Iona community, that a demanding common task alone builds community. And so in those tender days post-war, Ray Davy and others, George MacLeod and others, were asking what makes sense of the world we inhabit today in our context. For Ray Davy in Ireland, for George MacLeod in Scotland. And we know that we each have a particular story, yeah, but we're not unique. There are many, many other intentional Christian communities around the globe. And I hear you say also that, the church wasn't maybe responding in the way that these young trainee clergy were thinking it should. But I guess the question for me is, in the Iona community, we were never founded as an alternative to the church, but for the renewal of the church. Would that be the same for the Corrymeela members?
Yeah. So, I mean, we of course are laden with great hypocrisies and ironies. I mean, I don't think you could be a Christian without running into hypocrisy pretty quick. But Christians who talk about peace and reconciliation are in a completely different category of acuteness. But for the first 5 or 6 years of Corrymeela's history, they didn't really think that they would be involving Catholics in this ecumenical community. Ecumenical for them meant Anglicans and some Methodists, sort of.
Okay.
And and one of the reasons for that was that they saw themselves as a training organ for the churches, and
Mhm.
they saw themselves as a question mark to the churches.
Mhm.
We should serve as a contrast in some ways to the churches, not because we're better, but because, but because we think that reconciliation is at the heart of the gospel, and it is not um, often enough at the heart of the church's work. And
Yeah,
so, just to bring that question, to embody that contrast for their own churches was the primary task in some ways.
sure.
And they never, and we continue to resist the idea, even in the Northern Ireland context, where we still have a great deal of our members are uh, have a connection with the Presbyterian Church in Ireland, and so many who are a part of the Presbyterian Church in Ireland are finding that relationship with the denomination very difficult at the moment,
Yeah.
and the temptation, the desire to create an alternative to rather than a companion with or a contrast to
Mhm.
is an ongoing conversation for us.
And so you've taken us helpfully back to, that kind of the gospel call to reconciliation, to peace with justice. And I guess that's what binds us, whatever our own particular origin stories are. We're bound together through a commitment to the radical gospel of Christ, to the work for justice, to the work for peace, wholeness, reconciliation, and to live out this call as intentional Christian communities. And that intentionality, I think, is the area I want to kind of move into a little bit now. There are many. I guess every gathering of people of faith is an intentional community of some kind, but we have a particular way of being together in community. And I guess my question to you is, with the Ballycastle Centre, a bit like Iona Abbey, you've got a place where you meet, and with a scattered and a diverse membership who
Yeah.
meet locally in cell groups, a bit like our Iona Community family groups. What do you, Alex, consider to be the importance of intentional Christian communities in these days that we're living through, these days right now? Why does the world need the Iona community? Why does the world need the Corrymeela community as intentional Christian communities today? What do you think is ours to do, ours to be?
So I know the world needs the Iona community. I know that the Corrymeela community will continue to struggle in this world, not in some ways to change the world. I think we've tried that and come up wanting, and been pretty miserable in kind of the attempts to change the world. But what we have been able to do is attempt to resemble in our messiness, and in our patience and forgiveness with one another what a changed world might look like.
Hmm.
And we don't do that very often. We fail most of the time, but we get a glimpse of what a changed world might look like often enough that it keeps us going one more step further. I come from a tradition that um, I think I've come to the point where I need to be careful with my language, because particularly in Northern Ireland, if you say that you're not, if you say you're anti-evangelical, you're almost saying like you're anti-Protestant, because
Okay.
evangelicalism and Protestantism are almost seen as synonyms for many, who are practicing a form of it. But what I mean by the fact that Corrymeela, I think what the world needs from Corrymeela is an example of Christianity, an intentional Christian community that is allergic to the idea that I often see in evangelical movements. Evangelicalism, the good news that we share is always, the impulse is to share something out of love, out of joy, out of perhaps concern for the other. But that impulse to extend love often comes across as judgment, right?
Yeah.
I have something you need to hear. You need to
Yeah.
be more like me. And
Yeah.
what we are trying to do in Corrymeela with our understanding of the gospel is to start with the presumption that we are no better than you, and God loves you just as much as God loves me. You have something I need to hear.
Yeah.
I will understand the world and myself and God more if I catch a glimpse of how God has been alive in your life and in your experience. And um, that manifestation of what I think is at the heart of the gospel uh, sadly feels really rare, but when
Okay.
it is experienced, it is seen as something absolutely essential and necessary and helpful for people. So that's what we continue to try to provide.
And that radical, as in, going to the roots, the revolutionary, radical noticing of the Christ in the other, as the starting point, has resonances of what we call radical hospitality in the Iona community, that we welcome people into our community, whether it's at our residential centre or in our regional gatherings or in our family group meetings, with that full knowledge that we will be the ones who will be changed. Um, should we be open to the Spirit to meet them, and that receptacle into which we welcome people is a sense of community modeled, I guess, on the Trinity. That this beautiful interlacing of a relationship which has all the elements of the other that you've described earlier in the founding story, that we are the other.
Yeah.
That is the intentionality is that we live together in community, whether it's dispersed or gathered, in such a way that we expect to be changed, and it might be uncomfortable when we encounter the other.
It might be uncomfortable. It should be uncomfortable.
It
I
should be
mean,
uncomfortable.
I'm a big fan of Niebuhr. The point of the gospel is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And just keeping one eye, I saw one eye in the chat, and Yvonne Naylor was very helpfully, answering the question of what does the name Corrymeela mean.
Yes.
But that that story in itself is an example of us being changed in our own understanding of ourself. Because when we bought the land in 1965, the people who sold it to us said, well, it's called Corrymeela, which means Hill of Harmony. And we thought that was absolutely well. This is obvious. This is well, of course. That's what. It's a sign from God. We're supposed to have this place, the Hill of Harmony.
I
But it
think George
wasn't.
MacLeod would say, if you think that's a coincidence, may you lead a very dull life.
Right. But what's even better is that decades later, these wonderful people who both, christened it Corrymeela, thinking it sounded nice and lovely.
Yeah,
They appropriated the name from somewhere else. This is my favorite theory of this. Nobody really knows what it means, but
I love it. All the
my
origin
favorite
stories.
story is that there's a place down the coast where a river comes down into the Red Bay at Glen Arif, and there is a natural weir. There are stones across the stream that you can get across, and that is called Corrymeela. And they thought that was pretty, so they named the spot up here called Corrymeela, thinking it was nice and saying that it meant Hill of Harmony. But it wasn't until relatively recently that people here actually engaged with native Irish speakers. And the native Irish speaker says, well, it doesn't mean Hill of Harmony. I'm not exactly sure what it means, but it sure is not Hill of Harmony. It's something closer to lumpy crossing place, right?
Well, uh,
And, we have never been a Hill of Harmony, but we are a lumpy crossing place. And so we learn more about ourselves because we were actually in genuine, mutually respectful relationships with people that many of us had considered other.
mhm.
And being in actual relationship with them, they were able to reveal something about ourselves that we
Yeah,
did not know,
really,
very much at our core.
really interesting, and resonates for me with so many stories that I heard as I traveled across the lands we now call Australia, and heard origin stories and engaging with Aboriginal Christian leaders as we traveled. And they asked us, come with your origin stories, Ruth. And so I had to dig into some of the stories that had formed some of the Iona community's background, and realized that we had, in a way, misappropriated some of our own history about ourselves to ourselves. So a lovely little cameo there that you've shared with us about, you know, what do we like to call ourselves and what are we really called, and to what extent does our name reveal our true identity? Um, Alex, I'm going to shift us on. It's almost half past or halfway through our time together, and I want to bring us to Advent. So here we are in this season of not knowing, sometimes a season of uncertainty, a season of waiting, perhaps, but not just waiting for the celebrations of Christmas, but waiting in the for the revelations, for the not knowing, for the understanding of something deeper and wider. Yes, the anticipation of the birth of the Prince of Peace. But what does the season of Advent offer or mean to you, to your community? What are we waiting for as a community? What does this season of Advent hold a particular meaning or resonance for you at the Corrymeela community, in your intentional Christian communityness?
Yeah, I mean, Advent has. I'm very envious in some ways of the Iona community's robust worship resources and its ability to practice the renewal of Christian worship, and that Advent becomes such a, it's expressed in such a visible way through Advent. For us at Corrymeela, we were probably less robust in that. There are some exceptions to that, but certainly.
You have beautiful songs, and I have lovely memories of the Corrymeela singers in the years
Yes,
gone by.
but I think that for us, we, like so many other Christians, are caught in this the frustration and the promise of the already but not yet. That's
Hmm.
the theological idea that there is the coming of Jesus, but there's also the second coming. There is the joy and the satisfaction of knowing what we can expect in Christmas, and the the beauty that continuity and that cyclical, here it comes again, and despite everything that the world tries to throw at us, it probably will still be able to surprise us with its joy and its love. But there's also just that deep sort of, and here we are again talking about peace, and there is so much war. Talking about justice, and there is so much injustice. Talking
Yeah.
about hope, and there is so much despair. Talking about love when it does not always seem to bring people the needs that they have before them in each day. And so we, I think, are struck with that. How are we going to use this Advent to wrestle not just with, I would say there is enough suffering in the world. The world probably does not need two communities, Christian communities, also deciding that the job is to be as miserable as possible. I mean, I do think that we should probably give ourselves the freedom to accept the gift that God wants us to have in joy as a birthright. But it can be the and yes rather than the either or. It is both the freedom to celebrate the birth of Jesus and the promise of God's kingdom, and also say, and what we still want to come, the longing we have, the yearning we have, is for a world where the wolf shall lie down with the lamb, and where the desert shall become these meadows of crocuses, and the hungry shall be fed, and the lame shall leap. And so I think that we, like all Christians who are taking Advent seriously, are probably stuck with that ambiguity, and I think that's probably the point.
The ambiguity and the paradox, the painful paradoxes that are in there. Yeah, thank you. Uh, can you describe for us any particular, are there any rituals at Corrymeela? Do you have guests over the Christmas period or an Advent period? What happens at the center these days?
So, I mean, actually, what happens at the center these days is that things get very quiet. This is our
Yes.
quiet period of the year, and we all sort of go into a hibernation, which we shouldn't enjoy as much as we do. And but then there are saints like Yvonne Naylor who lead us through the Advent cycle in the Cree, our space of worship and reflection. And we have online, worships that are shared with the community and others around the world.
Mm.
And then we, but actually, but in some ways, I'll cheat a little bit and say that, as we go into the Christmas season,
Mm.
into the new year, that is when the Corrymeela community then rededicates itself to the work before us in reconciliation.
Mm. And I'd love to ask you a little bit more about, how people might connect with Corrymeela should they want to. But just before I do that, I'm just going to say to the gathered throng here, we're coming towards the kind of last quarter of our time together. So if you have a question or something that you'd like to explore with Alex, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you can electronically. Um, if you know how to do that, it's in the reactions. If you go to the bottom of your screen and click on the little love heart that says react, and that'll give you a raise hand option. So do feel free, like as if we're in a room together. Feel free to raise your hand. But if you do it electronically, I'll see you on the screen, and then we'll bring you up. We'll give you the microphone effectively, and you'll come up and you'll join us in the front, and we'll have a little conversation. So do please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. But for now, Alex, my question to you, you talked about members rededicating themselves in the new year. Um, can you say a little bit about what it means? Is the Corrymeela community for people who live in the island of Ireland? How could we connect with Corrymeela if we don't live in Ireland? How could we find out more? Could we come like you did, come and volunteer with you? How
Sure.
might we get involved?
Of ways to be involved in Corrymeela, and one of those ways is simply to come and be a part of one of our open events, or to bring a group that you organize to come and stay and engage with meet with our staff and say we want to do a program on this or that, and we can design that with you and for you. And we're very bespoke. We host people that have their own program in mind, and we just try to host them well, hold them well, and then we work with groups to say, well, we have an idea, but it's sort of half formed. Can you help us fill that out a little bit? And then, coming to volunteer at Corrymeela is always a possibility. It does help if you don't need a UK visa to come and do it. That's always an extra hurdle. But particularly 18 to 30-year-olds, we have a long history as Iona does of bringing in young volunteers. We have about 12 who stay with us from all over the world for a year, and that's just always brings us back to the fundamental questions, and they shake us out of our complacency, and
Yeah.
and say, you say you're about peace and justice, but you say you do this, but, and that's just such a great engine for that churn. And then we do have about 180 members, mostly in Northern Ireland, some in Great Britain, a few further afield. For us, we feel that we want everybody who comes and experiences something at Corrymeela that feels genuine and real to go and as we say, Corrymeela begins when you leave. And if you've experienced something with us, uh, it's easier to do it perhaps on a beautiful 7 acres on the north coast of Ireland because it does feel so set apart from the rest of the world. It does feel like a fresh place of belonging for everyone. But is there a way that you can take that and create moments, experiences wherever you live, work, and worship? So you do not have to be a member to do that. But if you are a member, what we expect from members is that they will help us to continue this story that started with Ray and the founders, in the particular of the story of Northern Ireland. And so we do sort of think that for to be a member of Corrymeela, you need to have a relationship with these people
Yeah.
and with
Yeah.
this place in some way. Now, I'm a member of Corrymeela. My relationship with Corrymeela is that I moved here and then became a member, a year later because I had that relationship. So you don't have to have been like, blood and soil, sort of, born
Yeah.
on the island of Ireland. But there needs to be a way that the story of Corrymeela and this community has become part of your story.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you are working for the engaging with difference, the healing of division, and
Hmm.
the work of peace and reconciliation in Northern Ireland and beyond.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, and
Yeah.
then it's one of the distinctions between our two communities that we are intentionally a global community and have been really. I mean, we took a bit of a leap in 2020, 2021. But we've always been a global community and had
Yeah.
associate members in particular from across the globe. Um, and, we'd say that the heartbeat of our community would be the rule of life, the commitment to the fourfold rule. Um, yeah. Listen, I see that we have a hand up. Tony Phelan, I'm going to invite Tony to come to join
Oh,
us
I remember Tuesday
here
from the
and
Abbey.
invite you, Tony, to share the reflection, your question. You have to unmute yourself.
Well, at least I have an Irish name, Alex.
Yes.
Is that right? Is
Tony,
Tony Irish or is
Tony,
it Phelan?
Phelan is Irish. Antoine would be Irish. Um, some of us on the WhatsApp were having a sort of back and forth conversation about
You mean
Advent.
the Iona Community membership WhatsApp group?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was reminding people, and it wasn't an always a welcome reminder, that the fundamental themes of Advent are supposed to be death, judgment, and the last things. Um, but it added up for me a bit when I saw um, David Coleman's first Advent reflection, which he puts up on Facebook and various other places from his eco chaplain's point of view, because he goes up the Hill of the Angels on Iona, and then from the top of that quite little hill looks round the horizon of all the hills that you can see and the mountains that you can see in the remote distance. And it occurs to me that the great thing about that thinking about last things is it gives you an idea of what the horizon looks like.
Hmm.
Sometimes we lose sight of the horizon. Um, and I think that ties in quite a lot with what you said about not changing the world, but modeling what a changed world might be
Hmm.
like, which means that it kind of lives in us and with us. And I'm very mixed up about all of this, but I'm certain that Meister Eckhart says somewhere that the business about the just man shall live by faith. I think he says that faith means you become the justice of God in yourself. Some
Hmm.
it takes hold of you. And those kind of things, that's the horizon that we live before. And although it sounds a bit grim, if you think judgment's the kind of key idea, it's also hopeful in a way because it means the things that you long for are the things that are deeply embedded in the way the universe really is. I think that's what David was saying. And he said the
Hmm.
mountains are there to help us because Isaiah begins his vision by calling on the mountains and the hills to listen.
Lovely.
Mm.
Fantastic.
Tony, I'm so grateful to you for explaining more of that because I am on this members WhatsApp group and I had seen the thread and I was thinking, oh my goodness, I hope Tony will come and say a bit more about that. So thank you. I mean, Alex, do
Well,
you want to share any reflections or thoughts?
I'm reflecting on the fact that Ruth, you and I will commiserate with each other about how sort of frustrating it is to pretend to be the leader of some community and then find the members are actually engaging in deeper theological reflections than we.
Always.
And then
Just
secondly,
look on the screen here. I'm seeing all these names and thinking, oh, the awe that I have for all of you. So yeah.
Tony has echoed. I was rereading. This is my indulgence is I have all of my father's sermons, and I was wondering what he was thinking about. The text of the last few weeks, and 39 years ago, whatever he was preaching on this, and his illustration was the question to the congregation was, "Have you ever driven through Kansas?" As an 8-year-old boy. Well, I have, and I can tell you there is nothing more boring than driving through Kansas, on a hot summer day. And then finally, you see the mountains, the Rockies in the distance. And that makes Kansas exciting. And it's kind of what Tony is saying, that those mountains in the distance give meaning to what we are going through here. And I'm sorry if there's anybody from Kansas with us. It was not a disparaging comment. It's just that Kansas is on the way to the Rockies. So there you are. Yeah.
Yeah, a hugely powerful image to kind of guide us. And I guess, the job of all of us who are believers or seekers is to notice these horizons wherever they might emerge, whether they're deep within us or in the landscape or the metaphorical spaces around us. And I think, I don't know, Tony or Alex, if either of you heard Thought for the Day this morning, where the speaker, a social justice theologian from Durham University, spoke about the first day of Advent and spoke about the sermons of Bonhoeffer, who wrote sermons and published sermons during Advent, and talked about the liberation of this season from the chains of sorrow and despair. And this was, I think, pre his time in prison. But he was, others will correct me if I'm wrong, but very powerful reflections from Bonhoeffer, which are resonant, obviously, of the founding stories of our two communities in the time of war, about in this time of waiting and of not knowing, having confidence that the horizons will emerge and will be part of the liberation, not only of us, but of the whole of the created order. Tony, did you want to say anything more?
No, I think I'm done. Thanks.
Wow. Thank you so much. You can put down the microphone. I will unspotlight you and invite anybody else who would like to come and join us. And meanwhile, just confirm a question that was put into the chat. The WhatsApp group is for people who are members rather than associate members of the Iona community. So there's about 160 or 70 of us in that group at the moment. So, but membership of the Iona community is an open book. If any of you who are on this screen would like to join the Iona community as an associate member, there's a click of a button at the top of our website. You can do that. Or if you are an associate member and are curious about the 2-year discernment program into membership, please do write to me. Alex, we're going to draw this to a close with if there's nobody else who would like to say anything else or reflect or ask a oh, here we go. Anne, yes, come and ask or share your wisdom, Anne. I'm going to add you here.
But this is actually not really a question or anything like that. It's just an addition to what you've just said about membership. Because when I was on the island in September, there were
on the island of Iona.
Yeah, I was there at the Abbey as member in residence, and there were people I met in the Abbey church and places saying, "Yeah, we want to join, but it's sort of a bit complicated. We can't really find out much in the way of detail about it." I then had a look. There are FAQs, frequently asked questions, about membership, and if people are interested, I would encourage them to look at those. Rather than this poor couple who were saying, "Yeah, well, we think we want to join, but we go and it just says click here and then they want our money."
Okay, good point.
More. So do please look at the FAQs.
Yes, go and explore. Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you. Let me just take the microphone and hand it to Elaine, who is going to join us on the screen with a reflection or a...
Well, I'm... It's partly a personal thing. Thank you so much, Alex, for what you've said. I live in Scotland. I've got a name that doesn't sound in the least bit Irish, but I spent the first 22 years of my life in Belfast or somewhere around the Antrim coast. And I was a bit, when you said early on that the word ecumenical meant Protestant, I thought to myself, oh no, that's just not the way I would see it at all. Why was it like that? And of course, when I think back to what it was like for me all those years ago growing up, and how coming to Edinburgh that I came to first, and it felt to me like leaping 40 years ahead in terms of the small bits of theologizing that I was doing at that stage. So I'm really wondering now, how likely is it that the word ecumenical will come at Corrymeela and in Northern Ireland to mean more like what we in Scotland would expect it to mean? And what about the involvement of the Church of Ireland? I was not a member of the Church of Ireland when I was living in Ireland, so my knowledge of it is quite scant.
Well, I'm horrified if I misspoke. So certainly in the first 5-6 years, ecumenical for the Corrymeela community really was, Presbyterian Methodist Church of Ireland. They then had somebody who was Catholic said, "Well, can I join this community?" And they had to take a vote. And they decided in the end, yes, Catholics can become members of this community, and we've had Catholic members ever since. We now have Jewish and Muslim members as members of the Corrymeela community. Ecumenical, the movement started in, because of the missionary service, that, the folks went out into the world and they found that they were the only Presbyterians, and anybody close to them was the Methodist in the same village, two towns over. And so ecumenical, which means the whole household, we think of it in our context as Protestants, Catholics, anybody in Christian who can think of more sort of that we can all be one. But actually, and I don't want to get down a rabbit hole, but for a while in the 20th century, ecumenical was a very Protestant project, kind of looking over enviously at the Catholics, going, the Catholics have this global church. Wouldn't it be good if we had a global church as well? We should be ecumenical and not let our denominational divisions keep us. Keep us from one another.
Thank
Absolutely.
you for that. That's actually very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I should say, obviously, full disclosure, the Iona community was Presbyterian and all male for a while at the very beginning, and called ourselves open and diverse. So we have a lot of learning to do. I'm going to bring Katrina in. Katrina, it looks like you might want to join this conversation. This might be the last bit of the conversation before we draw this to a close. But Katrina, over to you.
I was just going to ask Alex, do you think intentional community is taught or caught?
Intentional community is taught or caught? That's interesting. My sense is, this is going to be a very Corrymeela answer. It's both. Some people are taught, like I think Ruth and I are both coming from, and I don't know, Katrina, your background, I think we both were sort of, we would have been running away from something if we were not, a part of the Iona or the Corrymeela community or something like it. And others are lost and are looking for something, and they find in this, they are caught by the promise that an intentional community can offer. I don't think it's a one size fits all.
What's your thought, Katrina, as a former warden of Iona Abbey, full disclosure here, and somebody who's part of our membership and a beloved activist, craftivist on our behalf? What's your thought, Katrina?
I think probably more caught. I think you're right, Alex. I was caught and then taught. I think they kind of they knit together, they weave together. But that initial, this is really important. This is part of my life. Is a just to be with others who are committed or trying or messing it up and being honest about it. I think that for me.
And I think I'm being swayed by you slightly, Katrina, in that I can think of a lot of people who are taught in it and don't stick with it. In fact, they probably become, kind of repelled by it. And so, if they're not caught in another way, the teaching didn't really, perhaps, is what had them stick.
Yeah. Wow. What a lovely question to end on, Katrina. Thank you so much. I'm just going to say a few closing words, and then I'm going to invite Alex to offer us a prayer as we leave. And my closing words, friends, are just a huge thank you to all of you for joining in this first of our Advent series of Advent in Community. Please do join us again in the next 3 weeks. Next week, we're delighted to be joined by Lisa Riley and Joy Connor from the Wellspring community in these lands we now call Australia. It's a pre-recorded conversation with myself, Lisa and Joy, following very similar themes to the ones explored here with Alex. And that evening will be hosted by Fiona Fidgen, our beloved convener of the Community Life Committee. Then there'll be 2 further conversations on the 15th and then the 22nd of December. If you have been interested in either the Corrymeela or the Iona communities, please do, as Anne said, look into our websites, explore a little bit more, find out who we are, and come with us on the journey. We're offering these sessions completely free of charge, but if you would like to make a donation, we only survive with the flourishing and the support of all of you on screen and beyond. So do please consider making a donation to our community for this session. And if you're still looking for that special Christmas gift for somebody, well, you could give them a gift of associate membership of the Iona community or the Corrymeela community, indeed. So once again, thank you to you all for joining. And Alex, my sincere thanks to you for coming along with us. It feels like whatever kind of relationship we have as communities, we're certainly bound together on the road, on the path ahead, and whatever the journey ahead for 2026, into your 61st, 62nd, into your 7th decade, whatever that journey for Corrymeela looks like, but actually probably into your ninth decade as well, if you do the maths further back. May it be one full of joy and peace and hope and love this Advent and beyond. Alex, do you have a prayer to share or a blessing to share as we close?
I do, and I think I even have the ability to share, so that's good. But let me just say that this prayer is based on the scripture passage, the gospel passage from yesterday, the Matthew 11 passage, and or 24 passage. And for me, wrestling with that passage and some of the questions we've been talking about in terms of Advent, this longing, this expectation, was tempered in some ways by the imagery in the scripture passage, which this image of the thief that comes in the night and be ready. And it's an imagery that Jesus uses a couple of times, or the gospel writers use a few times. And what struck me about it is there is this longing, there is this expectation. And I think that there is a sense for a lot of Christians that, oh gosh, we should be doing something. We should be, trying to, again, this idea of kind of changing the world. Mm-hmm. And I do think that that's part of the project, but there's something in the language, and there's something about the changing of the seasons and the inevitability of the coming of winter and the inevitability of the coming of light that leaves me with thoughts of, we need to be expectant, but we cannot be in control. Just like we are not in control of the agency of a thief who breaks into our house at some point. That is beyond our timing or our want. There's something that is beyond us that requires a level of faith that the impulse for us to sort of change the world sometimes can leave behind. Right. So I will share this prayer for Advent 1, as it were. We pray, God, the thief who breaks into this world, God, the child who cries out with new life, as we prepare ourselves for Christmas and bed down for this season, surprise us in the night. Steal us away from the gloom. May we find ourselves separated from monotonous tasks and ready for the coming of light. Amen.
Amen. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you all.
Yeah. And best wishes for Advent, one and all. The next event and Advent and Community is on Thursday evening here with the Iona Community, Advent readings with the Wild Goose Publications. So once again, thank you, Alex, and thank you one and all.
Thank you. Have a very expectant Advent.